Hey y'all, welcome to the Team LocoFit Roundtable, hosted by me, Laurin, owner of Team LocoFit. Each week, I am joined by one of our coaches to dive headfirst into the nutrition, training, mindset, and coaching strategies we use with our clients. If you loved the show, please subscribe, leave us a review, tell a friend, you know the drill. And for more information about coaching, the programs we offer, and additional content, visit teamlocofit.com. All right, and we are back. This week, I'm joined by a guest, Dr. Buckner. I'm super excited. Hello. Say hi. Everybody does that when I start doing an introduction. They're just like, They just
me.
nod. They're like, that's me. So I've known you now since, when did you get to USF?
I'm on my third year.
Okay.
So
if you guys listened to a previous podcast, we had Dr. Bill Campbell on, who was my mentor at USF, and now Dr. Buckner is there as well. And he's awesome. And I was like, wait, why have I not had you on the podcast? Like, this is crazy. So let's do a little background first, and then we have two podcasts today that I think are going to be, well, we're recording two today. You're going to get one today and the second one on Wednesday. But today's episode is a little controversial in the strength world, but I think it's a really good discussion to have. But for that background, without further ado.
I'm Sam Buckner. I have a PhD in exercise physiology. I guess my background, why I got into this, I grew up doing gymnastics, and in high school, the only class I really enjoyed was I took weightlifting the entire senior year. And when it came time to pick majors, what to study, I didn't know what I wanted to study. I picked athletic training because I thought that meant I could train athletes. And many years later, I ended up getting a PhD in all this stuff. So I study skeletal muscle growth and adaptation. So using various different methods to induce muscle growth, to examine muscle growth. And I guess my interest, what really drives my curiosity is why our muscles grow. Do they grow to make us stronger? Do they grow for some other reason? And I'm interested in different techniques. How fancy does your training need to be? Does it need to be fancy at all? I'm interested in, I've done some questioning of periodization, the evidence behind that. That's been a lot of fun. I just really love studying skeletal muscle.
And then now, what is the lab called that you have? And what is your focus now at USF?
Yeah, so I'm director of the USF Muscle Lab. And we do research examining muscle growth with low-load alternatives to high-load training, so lifting lightweight, making muscles grow. We do some work with blood flow restriction, so restricting blood flow and examining adaptation. We're doing work with the NewFit device, so electrical stimulation and in muscle adaptation. And what else? We got a few other projects going on, but it's all, the center point is studying muscle.
So it's pretty cool. I would say that USF's program is so unique. I don't know any other lab in the country who is looking at physique science and muscle hypertrophy science as much as our group does. It is so amazing what you guys are doing.
Yeah, I think between me and Dr. Campbell, we have all the boxes checked. Whatever you, I guess, like to nerd out about regarding muscle or physique or whatever it might be, we probably have it covered.
Yeah, literally besides blood work, which technically if it gets paid for, you guys can still work it into a study.
Yeah.
That's really the only thing in-house that we don't do that I think would be cool, but obviously that's more like PhD program to have blood work.
Yeah, I think probably more than anything is the energy too. He loves what he does. It's very clear and apparent.
Yes.
And I really love what I do. And I think that makes it a lot more fun too.
That makes such a difference, because you've been, all of us have been, maybe not all of us, but anybody who has been to either a program or even just with a professor who you're like, man, do you even want to be here? Do you like this? It's not just they had a bad day. It's you can just tell they're just not into this. And the research they put out is kind of just a reflection of that. But you guys are so invested and absolutely love it. So I always recommend the program, but seriously, if you guys are ever interested in a master's, I cannot recommend USF's graduate program enough. So that's enough about your background. We're done talking about you, just kidding. But we are going to talk about this very interesting debate about the relationship between strength and hypertrophy. And this is something that is, I don't really know if there's one this is more of like a challenge, right, to the one way of thinking. I don't want to say, because there's a lot of ways to think about things in science, right? But I would say that the standard way of thinking, this is kind of challenging that, right?
Yeah. So what most people are taught, and what most people think, is that when you start lifting weights, the strength you gain in the first few weeks is driven by some type of neural adaptation, right? We call it the newbie gains. And sometime thereafter, and our textbooks would say around week 3 or 4, maybe week 5, that muscle growth becomes the primary reason you get stronger. And according to convention, again, according to our textbooks, the main reason you get stronger for the rest of your career is because your muscles grow. So in a lot of ways, it's kind of viewed as we questioned muscle growth as a mechanism for strength. What I kind of teach my students is that at the very least, what I'm pretty confident is the story we're telling now is wrong. The story we're telling now I don't think could be right. And there's so many reasons as to why I think that's the case. But yeah, I think we're challenging the narrative that is currently in place.
So why are we challenging it? Like what? Obviously, you have a stack of papers. Anybody who's not watching, they can. They're just listening. You've put out a bunch of research on this. Obviously, you've studied this for a lot of your career.
So, I guess where it started for me and the researchers I work with is we would use low-load training to examine muscle growth. And when you lift lightweight, you grow your muscle, but you don't necessarily get stronger. Right? So we've done several studies showing this. And every time we wrote our discussion in our research papers, we would dance around the strength data, right? Because muscle growth is the reason we get stronger. Why are we not getting stronger? So we would come up with all these ideas when we're writing our papers and say, it's just delayed. Or we didn't see it yet, but if the study was longer, we're going to see the strength change. And we were forcing the existing narrative, right? And we were writing some funky stuff to try to deal
justify,
with. Yeah. So I remember the moment me and my mentor Jeremy Leneke, we were walking back from, it's called Double Decker in Mississippi. So we were down at this fair type thing. We were walking back to school, and he says to me, he's like, I'm beginning to think muscle growth just isn't doing anything. And I said, nah, that doesn't sound right. So I disagreed with him. And he goes, well, where's the evidence? And why aren't we finding it? And at that point, he kind of challenged me, go find this evidence. Go find evidence that making a muscle larger is going to make it stronger, right? And so I started going through the literature and trying to find where did this story come from. And to be perfectly honest, it's very intuitive that making your muscle larger is going to make it stronger. Right? Your muscle is made out of contractile proteins. And I think this is why this has been viewed with such controversy, right? But we ended up designing studies to try to demonstrate this, right? So if I take a group of people and I train them for muscle hypertrophy, they should in turn get stronger. And if I take another group and just train them for strength, at some point their strength should be limited because they need growth, especially if they're trained. Right? So you've been lifting weights for probably a good 12 years. So the textbook would say any strength you gain is from growth. But I guess I'd ask the question, do you think you can grow a lot more?
Well, no, and I'm definitely not strong right now, and I have probably similar muscle mass.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
If you started exploiting movements, you would get stronger, but you wouldn't necessarily increase the size of your muscles. So right there, and obviously that's just an anecdote, but that pans out in the literature. We know that people can get stronger, and they're highly trained, and they're not getting stronger via growth, right? So that's...
Or it might be small growth, but that might be negligible growth with statistics, right? Like statistically speaking, there might be some growth, but that might not show up like on the paper. Right? Like the way that science works, like to us in real world, if I gained a pound of muscle, that's super exciting. I don't care if that's statistically significant or not. But that might not be significant in a research paper, right?
In a research study, if it was a very small amount of growth, the tools we have probably wouldn't detect
pick it up.
And I use beam on ultrasound, so that's a tool I use. And yeah, if it's below like a fraction of a centimeter, right, and growth typically is, you have to have a certain amount of it accrue to be able to say we had muscle growth in this study. So maybe let's go over the different areas that led us to question it. So the first was the low load training, right? It made your muscles grow, and it didn't make you stronger. Okay.
Was that only with BFR, or was that just low load in general?
Well, low load in general too.
Okay.
Sometimes it'll increase strength. It really depends on how you measure it, right? If you do a bicep curl, it's a pretty simple task. So there might be more chance that low loads and high loads will increase strength. But the more complex the movement becomes, the more important it is to lift heavy weight through that movement if you want to get better lifting heavy weight through that movement. So that seems to be the most important thing for strength. The second, I suppose, issue that we noticed was the correlation. And a correlation is just a statistical relationship between two variables, right? So when you train for muscle size, you typically get stronger because people typically lift 70% of their 1RM, right? That's been the recommendation for years. Lift 70% of 1RM, which is 70% of your max strength. Your muscles will grow and you'll get stronger. And the correlation would suggest that the change in your size of your muscle explains about maybe anywhere from 5 to 20 to 30% of your change in strength, statistically speaking. But I could design a study and I could make that whatever I wanted, right? So I could train with low loads and the change in muscle size would not explain the change in strength because there'd be no change in strength. I could have you lift 70% of 1RM and the correlation would be stronger because you're lifting heavier weight. So you could literally use study design to get the correlation that you wanted to see. Do you want a strong one? Do you want a weak one? So the very fact that the correlation can vary that much and you can exploit study design to change it was like, okay, we shouldn't lean too heavily on the statistical relationship. And then we looked at the detraining literature, right? So if you take a group of people and you train them lifting heavy weight, they'll get bigger and stronger. If you detrain them, they'll lose their muscle mass that they accrued, but you can maintain their strength if they just practice that strength task periodically, right? So the study I'm thinking of, I don't know how many weeks they trained. Muscle size and strength increased, and then they came in every month for like checkups. And every month they do a 1RM. That was enough to maintain their strength across time, but their growth went back down to baseline, right? So here's, I guess, what you have to suggest. If muscle growth was a mechanism for strength, right, when you had growth, then when you lost that growth, you have to say they then maintain strength via some other mechanism, right? So the detraining literature, the story is perfect if we didn't have this other half of it, right? You'd say muscle growth explains strength. But that was another area that we looked at and we're like, it's not really telling the story that we thought it would tell. So we then designed studies, right? I spoke a little too loud.
No, you're good.
And I'm getting excited, I guess. We used within subject designs. We had people train both their arms. One trained for growth, the other just did a 1RM twice a week. The first study we did was in trained individuals. Strength was the same in both of the arms. It didn't matter if they had growth or not, right? So again, we don't have perfect evidence, but we demonstrated that within trained individuals, growth was not a limiting factor for strength. We then did another training study in untrained individuals. And untrained individuals have a greater capacity to grow, so they have a greater potential. So they had one condition had growth, the other condition did not have growth. They did knee extension and chest press exercise. And over 8 weeks, the group that had growth had no greater strength than the group that didn't have growth. So once again, we didn't see it. Our lab at USF, we just had a paper accepted, and it was published as an abstract previously, so I can discuss some of it. We had trained individuals, a pretty large cohort, train one arm for strength and one arm for hypertrophy and strength. And for 8 weeks they did that, and strength was the same. But one one of the arms had muscle that grew. We then just had both arms trained for pure strength to see if they had increased strength potential, and it still didn't work. So I guess where I'm at now is, if muscle growth is important for strength, we have to be able to demonstrate it with study design, right? If it's the main reason we get stronger, surely some lab somewhere can demonstrate it's important, right?
Yeah.
And maybe we will. Like, my lab is trying. If it is important, I want to know. But what I'm tending to think now is that it either isn't a mechanism for increasing your strength, or it's playing such small of a role that we're just not going to be able to demonstrate it. And what does that mean, right? It means that maybe we don't focus so much on growth if our primary goal is strength, right? It doesn't mean don't ever train for growth, right? Usually it's a side effect you're going to get anyway. But I think what it does mean is, if you write your goals down and growth isn't one of them, maybe have some hypertrophy work, but don't spend too much time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that's probably the most important question that comes out of this, right? Like, what is important to you? And so I'm just trying to think through like a few examples, right? That would be like useful for people. So let's say somebody's a bodybuilder, right? Or a physique athlete. It doesn't matter what category. You're trying to get bigger muscles, whether it's full body or whether it's specific areas you want to grow. Obviously, most people who are training for a physique athlete is training for mostly hypertrophy, but they are typically going to be pushing some type of progression because, okay, if I could lift this weight before and then now I can lift more at the right, like whether it's more weight or it's more reps on the same movement, you're going to periodize things. You are hopefully going to add some muscle from that, as well as likely some strength, even though it's not their number one priority, but there is going to be some kind of like concurrency there. And I would say that most people would probably try to structure their training because that way there's a few reasons, not just for hypertrophy, but for not getting injured, not having overuse injuries, not just kind of haphazardly, because most bodybuilders, think about it, used to just haphazardly kind of go to the gym, do whatever they kind of felt like, and there was no real like progression there. And I do think that a lot of people can see progress that way for a certain period of time. You know what I mean? I think at some point you have to go, all right, what are some of the movements that work best for me? Let me really dial these in. Let me progress on them, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just trying to think through, like, for somebody who's listening who's in that situation, like, you would still care about, you're not saying don't care about, say, like, let's take a squat, back squat. You're not trying to squat, I'm not trying to squat 300 pounds right now, right? Because first of all, I don't care, but that's not my goal. But I want to grow my legs. I want to have some hypertrophy in my legs. Clearly, back squat, front squat, safety bar squat, all those squats are going to be really, really good movement for that. But do I need to work up to those like higher percentages? Maybe not, but if I was squatting 115 for 8s last week, and then eventually over a span of a few weeks, I can work up to 155 for 10s over a course of time, wouldn't we think that there would be some type of concurrency there? Or are you saying not at all?
I like this. So this is a cool way to think about it. And it's almost reverse. So it's almost using strength and performance as a proxy in the gym.
Because most people don't have a B-mode ultrasound and they're not going to be measuring stuff. So they're like, okay, I can look in the mirror, I can take a measurement, I can take some pictures, and I can see how am I performing in the gym. Not during a dieting phase or some crazy life phase. Like, I'm focusing on improving my training performance.
And I don't think it's uncommon to kind of track these things and use these as, am I going in the right direction? And so what can we use that information to tell us? I think it can tell you that if you're continuing to progress, you're not overtraining, you're recovering, maybe your nutrition's there, your sleep's there. Maybe it can give you valuable information. I don't think it's necessarily telling you that you grew. I think, and I remember freshman Sam Buckner doing bicep curls almost every week, and every time, I didn't have a beam ultrasound at the time, And the reason I knew my arms were growing is because my 1RM increased, right? I was literally 1RMing my bicep curls. But I think back on myself, I'm like, wow, like back then I thought that was a good proxy. And at a certain point, I think my growth was not happening anymore. I was tapped out. And my strength continued to increase. I don't think it increased at that point due to growth, but I was recovered, I was healthy. So I think it gives you valuable information. I don't think you can say it's synonymous with growth, though.
Yeah, but there would probably be some potential crossover, right? Like you're not getting weaker.
Yeah.
Like you're obviously getting stronger, and that could be a like training adaptation just because okay now you're new to this movement and there's oh my gosh what's the word that I'm thinking of, like economy of movement, right? Like you're getting better at stuff so you're able to train more. If you're training at these higher percentages, lower reps, of course you're going to be focusing on the strength, but say we're kind of in that sweet zone for like that hypertrophy, so like that 70%ish, like there could be a chance, right, that like right you're able to lift a little bit more and you're getting denser, your measurements are going up, like could be some concurrency there, but at the extremes you would probably disagree, right? Like low load stuff, 30% of your 1RM for 25 reps, you're probably not going to get a lot stronger. And then likewise, doing 95% for 1 or 2 reps, you're probably not going to get a lot bigger. But maybe in that kind of sweet spot, you're going to be able to progress strength, but also see hypertrophy, or you just think they're like just completely unrelated?
Well, I think progression is a natural side effect of the training, right? And if you're employing progressive overload, and if you're recovering and you are truly progressing, even if it's at a relative percent of 1RM, or if you pick up the same size dumbbell, but you're doing more reps across your workouts, it's a form of progressive overload, and progressive overload does seem important for adaptation. So I think you could use it as some type of proxy. I don't think you can use it as a guarantee, because performance can certainly increase with no growth occurring. So
for sure, I think that's probably more of the point that you're trying to get across, right? Like you can get stronger and there might not be as much growth. Like there could be more growth doing a different type of method, possibly, right? Which the next podcast we're going to talk about is kind of basics for hypertrophy. And I think that's where you see a lot of people who will do these what seems like crazy bodybuilding stuff, right? You're like, why is this person doing this? But like they're so jacked and so whatever. But like it's like it almost seems like you can do a lot of things and get hypertrophy, whereas strength is much more specific, right? Like you're not just going to accidentally be like, oops, I just squatted this crazy PR. Like most people are not doing that. Like most people really have to like be dialed into like their strength training and like very, very particular stuff. Whereas like you could do BFR, bicep curls or really, really heavy bicep curls and probably get hypertrophy from that, right?
Yeah, it would probably be similar levels of hypertrophy. But incredibly different performance outcomes if you're looking at a maximum strength test. And I think, and this is a not scientific way of looking at it. This is just like looking at people and coaching people for years and seeing people. So like a lot of high level strength athletes, right? So say it's like a power lifter or like an Olympic CrossFitter or something like that, right? Well, CrossFit's kind of a different animal, but something like that. Like these big compound movements, you're trying to get stronger in them. Powerlifting is obviously the easiest example here. But over time, generally speaking, those competitors with the right nutrition, the right body fat levels, like for them, the right conditioning, the right recovery, all of that, and getting stronger, a lot of times they're going to gain density, right? They're going to gain muscle hypertrophy, even though now they might not, but like if all is like certainly you can get stronger and eat like shit and barely sleep and kind of all that stuff, right? But like if you're really dialed in and you do a little bit of hypertrophy work with like this, like a lot of the strength focus, I think you probably see that most of those people get bigger as well as stronger over time. And that's why the current narrative was so easy, I think, for us to accept. When you think about the origins of our field, it was all built on 70% of 1RM. So every single story
pretty quality range.
Yeah. Everything we know is based off 70% of 1RM. The study that set this all in motion was a study that did, I think, 70% of 1RM, or somewhere pretty close. They didn't even measure muscle growth. They used EMG, so they put some electrodes on.
Yeah.
They looked at the force-EMG relationship. That study concluded that neural adaptations drove strength for 3 to 5 weeks. And when they stopped seeing that change, they assumed it was growth. So it was kind of this, it's either A or B. So when we developed this, we already had the assumption that it's A or B. What I think is that neural are probably more important for the long duration of your career for strength. And what I also think is that, you know, I always teach my students, I'm not against hypertrophy. I would probably scale it back for a lot of people, like a lot of athletes. There's not good evidence that they need to put on lots and lots of tissue for their sport, for example. And training for hypertrophy is a decent amount of stress that takes recovery. So is that time worth it for that particular person? And they need to consider everything they have going on in life, and maybe that's a place where we can pull it back a little bit, right? Maybe performance is going to be better. And that's been a kind of our message is, until the evidence is stronger, maybe keep it in as an insurance policy, but there's not strong evidence that it's really going to make this difference that everyone thinks it's going to make. So I had another thing. I think I lost my other point.
I am interested, though, what your thoughts. This is totally unrelated. I mean, it's related, but not directly to this question. So it's so interesting. I feel like when you look at something like CrossFit, right, which incorporates so many different types of movements and just so many different capacities, really, for the athlete. And, you know, I don't know what every person at every CrossFit box looks like, but a lot of the top females are so jacked, right? Yeah. Like, very muscular. And it's just always so interesting to me that they, based on the training, that, like, you know, you can look at girls who have done hypertrophy training or bodybuilding type training for years, and then you see the CrossFit athletes, and it's just very different. You know what I mean? Now, obviously, part of it's the movements and all that, and part of my theory is that a lot of them, again, not all of them, but a lot of people who are doing CrossFit are like eating to perform, and they're not necessarily, like, they're treating themselves more as athletes, where a lot of people who train for hypertrophy, whether they're a physique competitor or not, they're just kind of like, I just want to look better, and maybe I eat right, maybe I don't. Obviously, if you're a physique competitor, it's a little bit different, but if you are a physique competitor, you're certainly going through periods where you're dieting a lot, whereas maybe, and again, this is just generalizations because I'm not coaching all the CrossFit athletes to know what they're eating, but I don't know, I'm just like interested why you think that the hypertrophy response seems to be so strong with CrossFit females, versus a lot of the men they're in great shape, but they don't look vastly different. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, is this making any sense?
Are you saying the women in comparison to an athlete of a high caliber in a different sport?
Yeah, I just feel like a lot of the top CrossFit girls are just very, very muscular. And I mean, that's obvious, like, if you see them. Whereas, not that other athletes aren't muscular, clearly, but there just seems to be such a distinct difference between, other male athletes and male CrossFit athletes kind of look similar. Whereas a lot of female athletes and the top CrossFit athletes don't look as similar to me. Yeah. And it's not just because the other ones aren't lifting weights, like, they're likely lifting weights. And especially if we're looking at physique competitors, they're certainly lifting weights. Again, I know it's a very different comparison, but I'm just always interested with that because I'm like, man, like, there just seems to be a very big, distinct difference. And I don't know if it's because of the weights or because of the types of movements. Because if you look at, they use a lot of Olympic lifting. Yeah. A lot of the Olympic lifting, like, at the Olympic lifting athletes who are even at the Olympics don't look like the CrossFit athletes. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like,
I think I can maybe take a guess at this one.
Okay.
I don't know. But I'm
do a study on this, goddamn.
I'm thinking, and I'm wondering if it's just the type of athlete who's going to excel at this sport.
Yeah. That's kind of what happens with physique athletes. Right? Yeah. Oh, why are these people who excel and the look that excels then draws more people who would fit into that criteria.
Yeah, because I do know that a lot of gymnasts have had success in CrossFit. And that's because a lot of the movements are going to transfer. And I've never done CrossFit. I did one CrossFit workout one time, long time ago.
Just one.
And a lot of it seems to like. I think when I think of a gymnast, their build isn't entirely different. So maybe it's just
true.
That body type is going to excel, and when we see it at the highest level, that's what we think of. I also, this is just my mind thinking again, but the gymnast.
Sorry, I should ask you this before.
No, this is cool. This discussion's fine. I remember people always saying like the men's gymnastics team looks jacked, like they all look huge. Well, that's because they're on TV and they're all next to each other. When you all have when you see them in person, they're 140 pounds.
Yeah.
Like, part of it might be that too.
No, I've seen these girls
in person.
Yeah, I know a lot of people who train this way, who are just like they are just very dense.
Yeah.
But they're doing a lot of these Olympic lifts. They're doing a lot of stuff with very short rest. They're doing a lot of volume. They're adding in a lot of this HIIT type cardio.
Yeah.
It's just it's a lot of stuff all at once, and it's just interesting. And I've just always thought, okay, maybe it's a volume thing and an eating to recover type of thing. But then I'm like, well, wouldn't people who are doing just Olympic lifting be doing this too? But they don't seem to have as much hypertrophy, even though they have that strength, right? Like,
yeah, I would think the Olympic lifters are just really focusing in on that skill.
Just on that skill.
That movement.
And that's back to your point that like, see, these people are strong, but they're maybe not super muscular, whereas CrossFit is using a lot of those movements, but then they're also doing,
some metabolic training.
Yeah, a lot of other stuff.
Yeah.
From what I've seen too, like, and again, I'm clearly not a CrossFit athlete. I'm not in this whole world, but like some of the workouts are very technical. Some of them are very cardio heavy. Some of them are, so it kind of ranges, but there always seems to be a lot of volume.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm just always curious as to why that is, and as to why there's such a big difference. But I was just want to know what your thoughts were.
Yeah.
That seems to be like the perfect hypertrophy and strength blend, in my opinion. Because I look at that and I'm like, I could not do that. Like, and maybe that's just because it's self-selected. Like, that's not my body type. I am meant to just run long distances and probably not lift weights, if I'm really being honest. Like, my body's like, stop this.
Yeah.
I do so much better with lower load hypertrophy training. Like, I cannot, like, strength.
So you're good at endurance.
Yeah, way better at endurance. Strength, like, real strength training is not for me. Like,
see,
I hate heavy
with the low loads, it's tough though, because you can end up doing so many reps.
Yeah,
you can get monotonous.
It gets a little annoying. So I like to, switch it up, of course. But I've always been that kind of just like meathead who's just going to the gym. Oh, let me just bang this out. Let me try this new thing. Let me do whatever. Like, I'll do 15, 20 reps, but then you're like, oh, do a hard 6. I'm like, no, like, that's just not for me. But again, it doesn't matter. I train for, back to your point, which was the goals. What do I want to do? That's not what I'm not trying to be the strongest person in the world. I did one powerlifting meet, check that off, I'm done. Never again. But to your point, if you are doing something that is exclusively, let's say, I always want to have like practical takeaways for people, because we could just theorize and just nerd out for forever. So if you are doing something, you have a particular sport, a particular goal, you have to focus on that. So to your point, if you're really focusing on strength, you can do some hypertrophy, but if that isn't your main focus, you don't need to, make it that. Now, if you want to train that way and you have the time and you have the resources available to recover, try it out. Likewise, if you want to focus mostly on hypertrophy, sure, you can do some stuff that involves maybe some lower reps and some, hard training. And honestly, some people just like doing that. Like, it's fun to kind of switch it up for training, whether you're good at it or not. Sometimes it's cool to be like, all right, like, let me do like a test block. Like, let me see if I've got stronger or not. Like, and it's just kind of fun. And it keeps you engaged, whether just like you said, it can get really monotonous to kind of do the low load stuff. Like, oh, let me just go in there and do 20 reps again. Like, no, it can be fun to go in and do, okay, like, what's a 3 RM today? Obviously with some progression, but I think that it's your main point here is saying like focus on what you need to do as far as like your athletic pursuits and your goals, and don't think that they have to be like synonymous. They can be separate.
Yeah, I think so.
Did I summarize that properly?
Yeah, that was perfect. That was great.
You're like, yeah, that's what I'm
on the podcast.
You're like, that's what I've been trying to say. But I think that it's, when you, because you've gotten, I don't call it backlash because it's science, like it's not like it's real controversy, but this has been there's been a lot of pushback, right? Yeah,
there's been some constructive criticism.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, I don't think anything I said today is that controversial. When you just put it into the perspective of, okay, what would this actually mean if the evidence isn't as strong as we thought it was? And I think it's actually a good thing, because if we're spending too much time chasing adaptations that we don't need, it's pretty cool that we could allocate that to more sleep.
Yeah.
Or just more recovery.
Exactly. And that's, I think, a really important message that we always try to get across no matter what. We have people who, think so many times that they need to train, particularly women, but, I need to train 6 days a week, or I need to train all this time. It's like, unless you are in a very, very particular life situation, you're probably not going to be able to train 6 days a week. Yeah. Nor do you really need to. Like, honestly, we have most of our clients train 4 days a week. That seems to be a really, really good sweet spot. Of course, there's variations here. But I would say that for most people, if you get in 2 upper and 2 lower type workouts, if that's like your goal, you're gonna do pretty good. Even 3. I mean, you can get away with 3 if you do like full body, so you're kind of hitting everything.
Yeah.
Like more than you need to be hitting stuff more than once. Honestly, in my opinion, to maintain kind of progress, or at least make some kind of progress.
Yeah.
But you don't need to train 5, 6, 7 days a week. Like if you get a good amount of work done in those few days, you're going to actually allocate that time, like you said, to growth, to recovery.
Yeah.
And that is where you're going to see the actual potentiation of those gains, whether they're strength gains or they're hypertrophy gains or they're both, whatever it is, you need to recover in order to grow.
Yeah.
It's I don't know why that's such a hard concept, but it's because it feels good to be doing stuff.
Yeah, I think it's because of, I'm like this too. Everything I know about exercise science, it's hard for me to leave the gym in under 2 hours. But I just accept it, and I tell my students, like, mentally I need that. I need to feel like I beat myself up.
Yeah.
I know it's not smart, but I like doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
as long as I admit that that's the reason, it's okay.
Just like you don't drink any water, you just drink coffee. It's
exactly.
fine. We might need an intervention soon, but all good.
I don't need many interventions.
I lift weights for 4 hours a day, and all I do is drink coffee. That's Dr. Buckner, you guys, all right? Listen to him for health advice.
Come to my university.
I totally get it, because there's so many things where we know, and then we still do them. But if you accept that, I think that it's okay, right? Like if you accept really anything, like if you know, okay, maybe this isn't the best for me, or this isn't optimal, or this isn't ideal, but you know what? I fucking like it.
Yeah.
Then do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And sometimes life changes, and you have to say, all right, well, maybe this isn't the only thing that I can focus on. Right? Maybe for my optimal goal, I need to train 4 days a week for 130 minutes, and I need to do 3 cardio sessions, all this stuff, right? That's optimal. But you know what? Maybe you can't do that right now. Yeah. But you getting into the gym 3 days a week for an hour and doing a few walks outside is what you can do, and that's still going to help you maintain and be a healthy person physically and mentally.
Yeah.
So you have to do that right now, and that's okay. So the whole point of understanding science, I think the most important thing about science is learning, okay, what is harmful, what should we probably steer away from, what is just not useful, and then everything else, all right, we're just going to take these findings and apply them to how it works for us, whether it's optimal or whether it's kind of, hey, this is adequate. I don't want to say suboptimal, sometimes there's adequate, and that works.
Yeah, I mean, after you've been training for a certain period of time, this is, people don't want to accept this, but in many ways we enter the 10-year maintenance phase, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I've been for the last 3-4 years of my life. I'm not making substantial increases. And when I read what it's out there, the volume I have to do to maintain, and it sounds sad, right? If I say I'm not trying to grow, right? And I don't look huge, so people are going to say, well, this guy's clearly not grown all the way. But when you've been training for a certain period of time, you have. You've reached your limit. And then maintaining whatever you have accomplished can be done on less. And that's hard to accept too.
Yeah. But it's kind of like a nice insurance policy, because then you're like, all right, well, maybe and that's what I tell people now, because I get all these questions. Oh, what are you training for? What are you doing? I'm just kind of chilling at like 80%, which for right now, that works really well for the other parts of my life. It certainly doesn't mean that I have the best physique, or I'm the biggest, or the strongest, or the fastest, or whatever, but that's not my goal right now. And I can still relatively maintain. Maybe I don't look as good, or I'm not as strong, or whatever, but I'm still like, okay, it is a lot easier to maintain than people think. And we did a podcast, if you guys listened, it was that kind of the unicorn zone of balance that we talked about. It was that first question that we got from one of the listeners, and it was a situational question where basically it was like, a lot of these fitness influencers, have stopped tracking their food and they're training less and all this, but they still look great. They kind of maintain like effortlessly, and it's like, well, it took a lot of work to get there, but you actually can get to that place where maybe it's not effortless, but it's a lot easier because of the work that you've put in for the past 5, 10, 15 years. Once you've tracked your food for 10 years, you can look at stuff and know what you should be eating to maintain the physique that you have, right? Like, whether you want to admit that to yourself or not, like, you can't. You just have to make that conscious choice to do it. Same thing with training. Like, okay, some days I want to go in there and just like beat myself up. Even though it's not optimal, I just want to do this. And other days you're like, man, I got like 30 minutes. What can I do? Maybe this isn't the perfect workout, but I'm going to get something done. I'm still going to move forward.
Yeah. So, better than nothing.
Better than nothing. So is there, I know you're not really like big on social media, so I'm not going to plug that, but is there a way that people can look at the paper? Like, where would be the best way for people who want to check out these papers to read them?
So, where?
We could just put them in the show notes if you'd like.
I mean, I would tweet them out.
Okay.
I do retweets, and I tweet the papers. I think it's at Samuel Buckner 1.
You think?
Probably.
Okay, how about you just send them to me and I'll put them in the show notes.
That sounds good.
That's probably better. Clearly, Dr. Buckner is not super tech savvy, but all good. So we will put those papers that we discussed here in the show notes so that you guys can read them if you want. And then, of course, the coolest part about reading papers is that often they will cite papers that you then want to read too. So, it's going to be a really great resource. So those will be in the show notes. If you guys have any other questions for us, you want to check out the other podcasts that we have, articles we've written, apply for coaching, you can do all of that through teamlocofit.com. And then lastly, if you do want to submit a question to us to be covered on the podcast, some kind of situational question, there is the link to do so as well in the show notes. That is completely anonymous, so make it as personal as you want. That actually makes the questions a lot better, but we do want to protect your confidentiality. So thank you guys so much for tuning in, and on Wednesday we will talk about hypertrophy.